What if the biggest thing you've been running from your entire life isn't failure, isn't rejection, isn't even death, but yourself? Carl Jung believed that the deepest fear most people carry is not the fear of the outside world, but the fear of their own inner world. He called this hidden part of ourselves the shadow. And here's the unsettling truth. Every single one of us has it. Now, when you hear the word shadow, what comes to mind? Darkness, mystery, something you don't want to touch. And that's exactly how it feels when you begin to explore this part of yourself. Because the shadow is everything about you that you've rejected, denied, or buried deep inside. The anger you weren't supposed to show, the envy you pretended you didn't feel, the insecurities you tried to cover up with confidence, the selfishness, the desires, the impulses that didn't fit the version of you the world told you was acceptable. From the moment we're children, we start building a mask. We learn quickly what behaviors get love, and what behaviors get rejection. Smile, and people like you. Share, and you're praised. Show sadness or jealousy, and people say, stop being dramatic, stop being selfish, stop being difficult. And so we learn. We push those parts of us down. We pretend they don't exist. We lock them away in the basement of our psyche and build a polished identity on top of it. But here's the secret. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits, it lurks, and eventually it finds a way to come out. Maybe it's through an explosion of anger you didn't see coming. Maybe it's through sabotage, where you ruin opportunities just as they arrive. Maybe it's through a quiet emptiness that lingers, no matter how many goals you achieve. And yet, the terrifying part is not that the shadow exists. It's that most people are afraid to meet it, afraid to look in the mirror and see the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. That is the first dark fear, the fear of who you truly are. Now pause for a moment and really think. How much of your life is shaped by the image you want others to believe about you? How much energy do you spend proving, performing, pretending? How much of your identity is built on what you think is acceptable, rather than what's real? It's scary to ask those questions, isn't it? Because somewhere deep down you already know the answer. You already know there are parts of yourself you've been running from. Maybe it's your vulnerability. Maybe it's your anger. Maybe it's your deepest desires. And the thought of exposing those parts feels dangerous, like the world will reject you if they ever see the real you. But here's the paradox Jung uncovered. The more you hide from your shadow, the more control it has over you. Imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can push it down, keep it hidden, but eventually it bursts back up, stronger than before. That's exactly how your shadow works. And until you face it, it will keep finding ways to rise, often in destructive ways. So let's make this real. Let's talk about how the shadow shows up in everyday life. Have you ever noticed how much you dislike certain traits in other people? Maybe you can't stand arrogance, or maybe laziness drives you crazy. Maybe dishonesty makes your blood boil. Jung would say that often. The traits we despise most in others are reflections of our own rejected parts. What we hate out there is often what we've refused to accept in here. For example, maybe you pride yourself on being hardworking, responsible, always on top of things, and then you see someone carefree, unbothered, taking life easy, and you feel this anger rise inside you. Why? Because somewhere inside, your shadow holds the part of you that longs to relax, to let go, to not always carry the weight. But since you've buried that part, you project it onto others instead. This is why the shadow is so important. Because if you don't face it, it controls your relationships, your emotions, your life, without you even realizing it. Now you might be thinking, all right, I get it. The shadow exists. But why does it scare me so much? Why is it so hard to face? The answer is simple. Because facing your shadow means dismantling the image you've worked your whole life to build. It means admitting you're not just the good, nice, responsible, or strong person you want others to see. It means owning the parts of yourself you swore you'd never admit to. That's terrifying, because it feels like the death of your identity. But Jung believed that it's only through this confrontation that true growth begins. Until you face your shadow, you're not truly whole. You're living half a life ruled by fear, repression, and unconscious patterns. And here's the empowering truth. Once you stop running, once you bring your shadow into the light, it doesn't destroy you, it frees you. You realize that those parts you thought were bad or unacceptable are actually sources of power. Your anger becomes fuel for change. Your vulnerability becomes a bridge for connection. Your desires become a compass for purpose. But it begins with courage. The courage to look within and say, yes, this is me too, and I will not run anymore. So let me ask you, what have you been running from? What truth about yourself feels too heavy to carry? What part of you are you afraid to let the world see? Because the moment you stop hiding, the moment you integrate those pieces, you become unstoppable. You stop living a half-life, and you start living a full one. And this, right here, is the first great fear Jung warned us about. The fear of who we really are. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable silence can feel? You're sitting in a quiet room. No distractions, no voices, no phone in your hand. And suddenly, your mind starts searching for something, anything, to fill the void. You turn on music. You scroll through your feed. You call someone just to hear another voice. Because the quiet, the stillness, it feels unbearable. Carl Jung believed this reaction isn't random. He believed that underneath our restless need for noise, for company, for validation, lies one of the darkest fears we carry. The fear of being truly alone. Now let me be clear. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is a feeling of isolation, of lacking connection. But Jung was pointing to something deeper. The fear of aloneness, he described, is about facing yourself, without the masks, without the roles, without the constant noise of the world distracting you. It's about sitting in the raw space of your own existence, and realizing that nothing and no one can fill that space but you. Think about it. From the moment we're born, we crave connection. As babies, we cry for touch, for love, for safety. As children, we learn quickly that acceptance equals survival. Smile, behave, do what pleases others, and you'll be included. Step out of line, and you risk rejection. And so, without even realizing it, we build our lives around avoiding the pain of aloneness. We join groups, we build identities, we surround ourselves with people, with labels, with routines. But here's the haunting truth. No matter how many people you surround yourself with, no matter how loved or admired or needed you are, there will come a moment when you're left alone with yourself. And that moment terrifies most people. Why? Because when the noise disappears, so does the mask. And you're left asking, who am I without them? Who am I when nobody is watching? Who am I if I'm not playing the role the world expects of me? And that question can shake you to your core. Let me make this real for you. Have you ever been in a relationship that you knew wasn't good for you, but you stayed anyway? Why? Because the thought of being alone felt scarier than being with the wrong person. Or maybe you've kept friendships alive long after they stopped being real, just because letting go would leave you with empty space. Or maybe you drown yourself in work, in busyness, because silence makes you restless. That's the fear of aloneness at work. It drives us to cling, to settle, to fill the void with anything, just so we don't have to face the truth of being alone with ourselves. But here's the paradox. The very thing we're running from, solitude, is the very thing that can set us free. Because only in the silence, only in the stillness, only in the moments when you strip away all the noise, do you finally meet your true self. And maybe that's what we're really afraid of. Not the silence, not the emptiness, but the raw truth of who we are underneath it all. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." In other words, you can be surrounded by 1,000 people and still feel utterly alone if you're disconnected from yourself. That's the real terror, not physical solitude, but inner disconnection. The fear that if we stop performing, if we stop being what others expect us to be, we won't recognize who we are. But here's the empowering truth. When you finally face the fear of aloneness, you stop being afraid of losing people, losing roles, losing identities, because you realize you are enough, even in the silence. You realize you don't need constant validation to feel real. You don't need to fill the emptiness with noise. You can sit with yourself and be whole. Think about how powerful that is. Imagine living your life from a place where you no longer cling to relationships out of fear, where you no longer chase approval just to feel worthy, where you can stand in silence, in solitude, and feel peace instead of panic. That's freedom. That's strength. And the path to that strength begins with courage. The courage to sit in the quiet, to turn off the distractions, to stop running from the emptiness and let it teach you who you really are. So I want to challenge you. Tonight, instead of filling your evening with endless noise, try sitting in silence for just 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no distractions, just you. And notice what comes up. Notice how quickly your mind wants to escape. Notice what feelings rise when there's nothing to hide behind. That's where the fear lives, and that's where your freedom begins. Because once you can sit with yourself, once you can truly embrace solitude, you stop fearing loss. You stop fearing rejection. You stop fearing the quiet, and you start living from a place of inner wholeness. This, right here, is the second great fear Jung revealed. The fear of being truly alone. And it's the fear that silently rules so many of our choices. But if you can face it, if you can find peace in solitude, then you unlock a strength most people never discover. And if this resonates with you, if you feel this message pulling at something deep inside, then make sure you subscribe right now to Intuition Decoded. Because the journey doesn't stop here. The third fear Jung uncovered is perhaps the darkest of them all. The fear of meaninglessness. And in the final part of this series, we're going to face it together. Let me ask you something raw and honest. Have you ever had a moment where you paused in the middle of your life and thought, what is all of this even for? You wake up, you go to work, you chase goals, you scroll through the same feeds, you make plans, you pay bills, you laugh, you cry, but then suddenly, there's a question that creeps in. So subtle, so quiet, but impossible to ignore. Does any of this really matter? Carl Jung believed this question is at the root of humanity's deepest fear, the fear of meaninglessness. And unlike the other fears we've talked about, this one doesn't just lurk in your personal life. This one cuts to the core of existence itself. See, we are not just creatures of survival. We are creatures of meaning. Food, shelter, money, success, these things keep us alive. But meaning is what makes life worth living. Without it, even the greatest achievements feel empty. Without it, even love feels hollow. Without it, no amount of wealth, fame, or success can fill the void. And yet, deep down, every human being carries the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, none of this has meaning at all. Now, most people don't talk about this fear. We bury it under routines, under goals, under distractions. But it shows up in moments you least expect. That midlife crisis where suddenly the job, the house, the car don't feel enough. That quiet despair when you reach a milestone you thought would make you happy, and yet the emptiness is still there. That restless longing you can't explain, as if your soul is searching for something just beyond your reach. That's the fear of meaninglessness speaking. And here's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It creeps in during the quiet hours when you're lying in bed and the noise of the day has faded. It creeps in when you look at your life and wonder why the happiness you expected hasn't arrived. It creeps in when you ask, what's the point? Why am I here? And most people, terrified of this question, run from it. They fill their lives with distractions, work, relationships, entertainment, addictions, anything to avoid facing the void. But Jung believed this is a mistake, because the fear of meaninglessness is not something to escape. It is something to confront. Let me make this real. Imagine someone who spends their entire life climbing the corporate ladder. They sacrifice time, relationships, even their health, because they believe that reaching the top will finally bring them fulfillment. And then one day, they get there. They have the title, the status, the money, but instead of peace, they feel emptier than ever. Why? Because all along they were climbing a ladder, leaning against the wrong wall. They were chasing external success instead of inner meaning. This is why so many people break down in midlife. They realize the things they've been chasing don't answer the real question. Why am I alive? And that question is the one most people fear to ask. Because if the answer is nothing, then everything collapses. But here's the truth Jung offered us. Meaning is not something the world hands you. Meaning is something you create. It doesn't come from outside. It doesn't come from status, from possessions, from approval. It comes from aligning your life with something bigger than yourself. From connecting to your soul, your values, your unique path. And yes, this takes courage. Because it means you have to stop running. You have to stop numbing yourself with distractions and face the emptiness head-on. You have to look into the abyss and say, even if there is no given meaning, I will create my own. That's what separates a conscious life from an unconscious one. Most people drift. They let society, culture, or family dictate their purpose. They chase what others say will bring happiness, and then they wonder why they feel so lost. But the brave ones, they choose. They decide what their life will mean. They take responsibility for creating their own story. And here's the beautiful paradox. Once you accept the possibility of meaninglessness, you are free to create any meaning you want. You are no longer bound by what society tells you is valuable. You are no longer a prisoner of chasing empty goals. You can ask, what matters to me? What do I want my existence to stand for? Maybe for you, meaning comes from creativity, building, writing, expressing. Maybe it comes from connection, family, love, community. Maybe it comes from growth, learning, evolving, discovering. It doesn't matter what form it takes, as long as it's real to you. Because here's the thing. Life doesn't need an objective meaning written in the stars to be worth living. It just needs the meaning you give it. But most people never reach this point. Because the fear of the void is so overwhelming. They'd rather stay distracted forever. They'd rather keep chasing goals they don't care about, living lives that don't fulfill them, all because they're terrified of facing that one silent truth. That meaning isn't found, it's created. And that is the final dark fear Jung revealed. The fear that if we stop running, if we stop distracting ourselves, if we strip everything away, we might find nothing. But if you have the courage to face that fear, to look into the nothingness, and then create your own meaning, you will unlock a freedom most people will never know. So let me ask you, right now, what gives your life meaning? Not the meaning your parents wanted for you. Not the meaning society told you to chase. Not the meaning you pretend to care about, so others approve of you. Your meaning. What makes your existence worth it? That's the question only you can answer. And it's the question that separates the ones who live half asleep from the ones who live awake. So yes, Jung was right. There are 3 dark fears shaping your life. The fear of who you really are, the fear of being truly alone, and the fear of meaninglessness. They are deep, they are uncomfortable, they are terrifying, but they are also the doorway. Because if you face them, if you bring them into the light, if you stop running, You'll discover a freedom, a wholeness, a power that nothing in this world can take away. And maybe, just maybe, that's what you've been searching for all along. So here's my final invitation to you. Don't just listen to this and move on. Sit with it. Reflect on it. Dare to ask yourself the questions most people never do. And if you're ready to keep going deeper, if you're ready to face the shadows and decode the truth of your own soul, then hit that subscribe button right now and join us here at Intuition Decoded, because this is just the beginning.